Adrian Cole was the kind of man the world pointed at when they whispered about power. His name alone carried enough weight to shift entire markets. His signature could make or break fortunes, and his presence in any room sucked the oxygen out of it. Yet beneath the tailored perfection of his suits and the cold fire in his gray eyes, he was still a man shackled to a ghost. A memory that refused to let go, for before the billion-dollar empire, before the endless board meetings and private jets, there had been Ella Rotha, woman who had captured his heart when he was still a young dreamer. The woman whose laughter had once been his favorite song, whose touch had steadied him when he thought he had nothing, and whose sudden death in a car accident had left him fractured beyond repair. So when he met Clara years later, with her soft brown eyes and smile that lit rooms in a quieter, gentler way, he convinced himself she was a second chance delivered by fate, a balm for wounds he never really wanted to heal. And though their marriage appeared picture-perfect on magazine covers and gala stages, Clara could feel the cracks from the beginning. For while Adrian was kind, generous, even affectionate at times, there was always a distance in his gaze, a hesitation in his words, a sense that he was measuring her against someone she had never met, and that someone was Alara. Clara noticed it in small things at first, the way he looked past her sometimes, as if searching for a face in a crowd. The way he called her darling with a tone that felt rehearsed rather than raw, the way his study still carried a faint scent of lavender, Alara's favorite perfume, long after Clara had moved in. But she told herself it was insecurity. That over time he would see her for who she truly was and love her for it. Yet months turned into years, and though she bore his silences, supported his ambitions, and carried herself like the dignified wife of a titan, inside she felt like a shadow, invisible in the very place she was supposed to shine, until one night at a charity gala when Adrian, distracted by a phone buzzing in his pocket, introduced her absent-mindedly to a foreign investor as Alara. And though he corrected himself quickly, laughing it off as a slip, the words seared through Clara's chest like a blade, leaving her smiling on the outside but bleeding within. So she excused herself, retreated to the marble powder room, and pressed trembling hands against her reflection in the mirror as tears threatened to undo her composure. And in that moment, she whispered to herself the truth she had been terrified to face. She was not his wife in his heart. She was a substitute, a stand-in for a ghost she could never compete with. That night, she returned to the gala floor with grace, her mask firmly in place, but something inside her had cracked irreparably. And in the weeks that followed, the crack grew into a canyon, fed by every absent glance from Adrian every evening. He chose his laptop over her company, every time she caught him staring at a faded photograph hidden in his drawer. The photo of a girl with golden hair and eyes that looked like summer, the girl who had died but somehow still lived between them. And Clara realized with brutal clarity that no amount of patience or loyalty would make her more than second place in his heart. Still, she gave him chances, tried to spark conversations, planned dinners, even suggested vacations. But Adrian's answers were always later. Another time, not now. Till finally, one rainy evening, while he sat at his desk, drowning in contracts and numbers, she walked in with her hands shaking, but her eyes steady, placed a manila folder on the polished mahogany surface, and when he looked up, his breath caught at the words stamped in black across the top. Divorce's pen froze mid-signature. His heart slammed against his ribs, because for the first time, in all these years, the carefully constructed world he thought was unshakable tilted violently. And the one woman he thought would always be waiting, always enduring, was walking away. "Clara, what is this?" he asked, his voice more fragile than he intended. And she looked at him with eyes that had once begged for his attention but now burned with resolve. And she said softly but firmly, "This is me refusing to live in another woman's shadow any longer." Ash! And as thunder rolled outside and the city lights flickered against the glass walls, Adrian Cold, the man who feared nothing, who had lost deals worth billions without flinching, who had stared down ruthless competitors without blinking, felt the first true panic of his life rising like fire in his chest, because he suddenly realized that in chasing a memory, he had ignored the living, breathing woman beside him, and now she was leaving, and this time it was not a ghost he was losing, but his wife, his partner, the only chance he had left it real. Love, and though he reached for words, none came for the great Adrian Cole. Master of every negotiation, found himself speechless when it mattered most. Adrian Cole had always believed there was nothing in the world he could not control, no crisis he could not bend to his will, no storm he could not weather with strategy and force. Yet as he stared at the divorce papers Clara had left on his desk, he felt the walls of his fortress tremble, for the woman he had thought of as unshakable, dependable, and quietly loyal had finally reached her breaking point. And for the first time, he realized how blind he had been, how much he had taken her for granted, how his obsession with the past had poisoned the present, and though his pride screamed at him to toss the papers aside, to pretend she was bluffing, something deeper, more primal silenced that arrogance and left him with the raw truth he was about to lose her if he didn't act. So he rose from his desk that night, abandoning the emails, the contracts, the endless noise of his empire, and went searching for Clara through the rain-slicked streets, only to find their penthouse bedroom empty, her clothes half gone, her perfume lingering faintly in the air like a farewell. And his chest tightened in panic as he realized she had not just threatened to leave, she had left. Truly left, and suddenly the man who could summon chauffeurs and jets with a call was standing helpless in the silence of his own home, surrounded by luxury, but stripped of the only thing that mattered. Days blurred into nights as he tried to call her, text her, beg her assistance, her friends, even her estranged family for answers. But Clara, the woman he had always assumed would wait, had vanished with a quiet strength he had never known she possessed, leaving no trace except the papers that screamed of finality. And as Adrian sat alone in the penthouse staring at the city's skyline, haunted by memories of her soft laugh, her gentle hands, her unwavering loyalty, he realized with a crushing weight that it was not Clara who had been his salvation. It was Clara all along, the woman who had given him a home, who had filled his cold life with warmth, who had loved him not for his empire, but for the man beneath it, and now he had driven her away. Tormented by regret, he abandoned the boardrooms, skipped meetings, ignored calls from frantic executives, because for the first time in his career, business meant nothing. Money meant nothing. And the only negotiation worth winning was with the woman whose heart he had carelessly broken. So he launched his search with the desperation of a man drowning, hiring private investigators, sending people across cities, chasing rumors of where Clara might be. And after weeks of torment, he finally found her in a small coastal town miles away from the noise of their life, dressed simply, working quietly in a local bookshop, her hair tied back, her face serene in a way he had never seen when she was with him and when he stepped inside, dripping from the sea air. She looked up, her eyes widening for a moment before settling into calm detachment, as though she had rehearsed this encounter. In her mind had built walls higher than any skyscraper he owned. "Clara, please, need to talk to you," he said, his voice unsteady, but she only shook her head softly and returned to stacking books. And the rejection cut deeper than any corporate defeat he had ever known, because for the first time, Adrian Cole was not the man in control. He was a man begging, and she was the one with the power. He followed her out of the shop that evening, pleading with her in the golden light of the setting sun, confessing truths he had never spoken, admitting that he had been blind, that he had compared her to Clara out of fear, that he had clung to the past because he was terrified of losing love again. And as his words spilled out, raw and desperate, he saw Clara's eyes glisten but remain firm, her lips trembling as she whispered, "Adrian, you only realized my worth when I left, but I lived every day knowing I was not enough for you. And I cannot go back to that prison." And though her voice broke, her conviction did not, and she turned to walk away, leaving him shattered in the sand-strewn street. Adrian did not give up. He stayed in that coastal town, refused to leave, sending flowers she never accepted, writing letters she returned unopened, waiting outside the bookshop just for a glimpse of her smile. And in the nights he sat alone, in the cheap inn by the shore, He was forced to confront the truth he had buried for so long. Clara had been his past, yes, but Clara had been his chance at a future. And now that chance was slipping away because of his arrogance, and he would do anything to rewrite the ending. One stormy evening, he finally cornered her outside her small rented cottage, rain pouring between them as he dropped to his knees in the mud, his expensive suit ruined, his pride abandoned, and begged her not as a CEO, but as a broken man, swearing he would change, that he would burn every reminder of Clara if it meant proving his love, that he would spend the rest of his life showing her that she was his one and only. And for a flicker of a second, he saw her resolve waver, her lips part, as though to respond, but before she could, another figure stepped out of the doorway behind her, a man, tall, rugged, with a protective hand resting on Clara's shoulder, and Adrian's heart froze as Clara looked at him. Then at Adrian, her voice shaking as she whispered, "I'm not alone anymore," and with those 4 words, the world that Adrian thought he could salvage crumbled, leaving him staring in disbelief at the woman he had taken for granted now standing with someone else, someone who had offered her in weeks what he had failed to give in years, the feeling of being truly chosen. Adrian Cole had stood on stages where entire nations tuned in to hear his voice, commanded boardrooms where billionaires hung on his every word, had signed deals worth more than most people could dream of in 10 lifetimes, yet none of that mattered now as he stood drenched in the rain on a narrow cobblestone street, watching the woman he had once dismissed as a shadow stand, firm in front of him with another man's hand resting protectively on her shoulder, her eyes glistening but unyielding as she whispered those words that rang louder than any gunshot in his chest. "I'm not alone anymore," and though his instincts as a CEO told him to fight, to strategize, to win her back like a negotiation, something deeper inside him crumbled. Because this was not a merger to be signed or a competitor to be outmaneuvered. This was his wife, his Clara, who had once looked at him with unguarded devotion, and now looked at him like a stranger she had already chosen to move on from. And that realization sent him spiraling into a darkness he had never known. For in all his power, in all his wealth, he had never felt so utterly powerless. The days that followed were a blur of torment, with Adrian refusing to leave the coastal town even as whispers spread that the mighty Cole was reduced to haunting bookstores and seaside cafes just for a glimpse of his estranged wife, a man who had traded skyscrapers for silence, meetings for misery. And as he watched Clara from a distance, her laughter with the rugged man named David, her ease as she shelved books, her serenity in a simple life that had nothing to do with luxury, Adrian felt jealousy burn through him. But beneath it a deeper anguish stirred, the bitter awareness that this peace she radiated was something he had never given her, that the woman who had been a ghost in his penthouse was now flesh and blood in this quiet town, finally free of the chains he had unknowingly wrapped around her, and the weight of that guilt was crushing. One evening, unable to bear the silence any longer, he confronted her outside the shop, his voice breaking as he begged her to hear him, to listen just once, and when she turned to him with eyes tired from carrying years of disappointment, he dropped his pride like a cloak too heavy to wear and poured out the truth he had hidden from everyone, confessing how Clara's death had shattered him, how marrying Clara had been his attempt to fill a void he didn't understand, how he had failed to see that she was not a replacement but the one woman capable of giving him a future. And his words spilled raw and desperate into the evening air, drawing the attention of strangers who stopped to watch the mighty Cole beg, like a broken man, but Clara, though tears filled her eyes, only whispered through trembling lips, "You don't get to wake up now just because you're losing me," walked away, leaving him crumpled in the street like a discarded man. Yet Adrian did not leave, could not leave, for something stronger than pride chained him there. And he began to show up not with gifts or flowers that could be dismissed as grand gestures, but with actions. He carried crates into the bookshop when no one else was there, stacked shelves without being asked, swept floors long after closing, endured the wary glances of David and the cool distance of Clara. And for the first time in his life, he was not commanding but serving, not demanding, but waiting, and though days turned into weeks of silence from Clara, he held on, for he had nothing else left to hold. In the quiet of his rented-in room, he stared at the ceiling, and allowed the memories of his arrogance to tear him apart every time he had called Clara darling while thinking of Alara, every dinner where she had tried to reach him while he buried himself in his phone, every moment he had dismissed her smile as something ordinary when in truth it had been a gift he never deserved. The more he replayed those mistakes, the more he felt the man he had been die and something new, fragile but determined, take its place. One stormy evening, unable to contain the fire inside him, he waited outside Clara's cottage, rain pouring in sheets, his expensive suit clinging to him like chains, and when she emerged with David by her side, Adrian dropped to his knees in the mud, rain and tears blurring together as he begged not with the polish of a CEO but with the desperation of a broken man. For her to see him not as the arrogant ghost chaser he had been, but as someone willing to burn the past to ash if it meant earning even a sliver of her forgiveness. And though Clara's lips trembled, her walls held strong until fate intervened days later in a way none of them expected. For one quiet afternoon, as Clara laughed with a customer in the bookshop, her face suddenly paled, her hand clutching her chest as her body gave way, and the world seemed to slow as she collapsed among the shelves, books scattering around her. Like fallen leaves, and Adrian, who had been nearby, rushed forward with a terror that hollowed him out, scooping her in his arms, screaming her name, his heart beating louder than the storm outside as he raced her to the hospital every second. A dagger of fear that he might lose her forever, not to another man, not to distance, but to death itself. He sat at her bedside for hours, her hand in his, whispering through tears he had never shown anyone, "Don't leave me, Clara. Not like this, please. I'll do anything. I'll change. I'll spend every breath proving you're my only one." And when her eyes fluttered open weakly, when her lips curved in the faintest of smiles as she whispered, "Stop crying. I'm still here," something inside him broke wide open. A floodgate of love and relief washing away every shred of pride. For the first time she saw not the CEO, but a man stripped bare, trembling, terrified, utterly devoted. And though her heart was cautious, something in her walls softened. In the weeks that followed, as she recovered slowly, Adrian refused to leave her side, fetching water, adjusting pillows, reading to her in the quiet hours, while David, seeing the sincerity in his rival's eyes and the invisible thread still, binding Clara and Adrian, quietly stepped back, knowing some bonds could not be replaced. And when Clara was strong enough to walk by the shore again, she met Adrian there under the golden glow of sunset. Her voice soft but steady as she said, "I don't know if I can forget the past, but I've seen you change, and I've seen you fight for me in ways you never did before. So I will give you one last chance, not because I'm weak, but because part of me still believes in the man I once loved." And Adrian, tears glistening as the waves crashed behind them, promised with every fiber of his being to never again let her doubt her worth, to never again let a ghost rob him of the miracle standing in front of him. And months later, the world gasped when headlines revealed the great Adrian Cole had stepped down from his empire, choosing instead to live quietly by the sea with the woman he had nearly lost. And those who saw them together could feel that the story was not about perfection, but about redemption, about a man who had loved wrongly, almost lost everything, and finally learned that true love is not found in clinging to the past, but in cherishing the present. And as Adrian held Clara close on a quiet evening by the water, her laughter mingling with the ocean breeze, he whispered, "You are not Alara. You are my Clara, my only," and for the first time in his life, the words were not just true, they were enough.